Alright, so I'm going to go through some of the necessary vocabulary and a brief history of voting rights and eligibility in our country. Ever since our Constitution was created and we became a country, how have things changed and how have people got their rights? The first thing I want to make sure you guys do is copy down a lot of the really important vocabulary. I know there's a lot. There are going to be 2 slides of it, but it is something that is all very important, and I promise you will be on the test that you take later this week. Now, if you have a class that requires you to do Cornell Notes, you can use that here. Otherwise, if you do not have that specific requirement, you can copy them however you see them on the slide right here. And I realize that my face might be cutting off the bottom, so if that is the case, I need to make sure that you're paying extra close attention and you're listening as I explain each and every one of the words. That way, anything that's cut off by the video, you're able to copy down anyway. So our first one, this is all about voting. This is about the rights to vote. This is about all that stuff. And our first vocabulary word is called suffrage. It has nothing to do with suffering, but the word suffrage itself means the right to vote. Ideology means a philosophy or set of ideas a person has about politics. You might say that someone that has a similar ideology as you might belong to the same political party. And a political party is a group of people who share a similar set of political beliefs. So ideology is that set of political beliefs, and a political party is a group that have that same idea, those same political beliefs. A literacy test is a test that throughout history many people had to take before they were even allowed to vote, to make sure that they were able to read and that they'd be informed citizens before they voted. A primary election is an election used to determine who is going to represent a specific political party in an election. They usually do one of these about a year or so before the regular election. So the Democratic Party will have a primary election, as will the Republican Party, to see who their final candidates will be. That being said, to give a little more explanation on what I just mentioned, a candidate is anyone who is running for a political office, any person who's trying to get that job. Demographics are groups of people that are usually included together based on specific qualities like age, gender, race, or other group similarity. So if I were a president and I was looking to convince a younger demographic of people to vote, meaning people who are eligible to vote between the ages of 18 and 25, I might appeal to them on TV shows that they watch or on issues that they might be more interested in or have more concern about. Interest groups are groups that spend time and money trying to convince politicians to vote in a certain way that will be beneficial to a company and its interests. So a company like Coca-Cola might hire an interest group, meaning a bunch of people that will try to convince politicians to vote on things that might allow them to sell more soda or sell soda by a larger amount or in a larger price. So it's anything that a group of people, an interest group is a group of people that is trying to do anything they can to increase voting in the best interest of their company or group. An incumbent is anyone who's running for re-election. So they already have the job, they're trying to get the job again. So before our most recent election, Barack Obama was the current president and he was running for re-election. In that election, he was the incumbent, meaning the person that already had the job. A platform is a specific series of opinions a candidate supports in an effort to gain the support of voters. So it's a set of opinions. It's one basic set. So if you're listening on a radio interview or a TV interview to a candidate, their overall idea, their plan for the country is considered their platform. It's all the issues that they have that they're trying to argue for. Corruption, which is a big problem in politics. Corruption is the act of being dishonest or unfair for a personal advantage. That can apply in general in life, but when it comes to politics, it could apply to situations where someone might take money in order to vote a certain way, or they might do something that's anything that is not best representing the people that have voted for them. Accountable is another word that should be known by you guys just based on your everyday lives. It's the act of taking responsibility for your actions. And a third party is a group of people who are not directly involved in a conflict but have some influence as an outside source. So if 2 people are in the middle of an argument or a fight, someone who's standing near there might be a third party. They're not directly involved, but they have influence as a witness or as someone who might have something to gain from one side or another winning. Bias is when a person has a positive or negative prejudice on something, and that usually stops them from being able to think objectively or vote objectively. For example, if you're someone who feels that you never ever want to vote for someone who wears Nike sneakers and your candidate wears Nike sneakers, you might switch your option because you're biased. You have a negative prejudice just because someone wears a certain kind of sneaker. And that can really apply to anything, whether it's their political party, their race, their gender, how they dress, where they're from, or not even in politics. Bias is any situation where anyone has a positive or negative prejudice that stops them from feeling completely fair. Propaganda is a word that you've already learned, hopefully by now this week, which is anything that is used to try to influence the opinions of others. It can be in the form of a commercial, a poster, or really anything, a little jingle you hear on the radio, anything like that. It is used to try to convince people to vote a certain way or to change their mind on something. And the Electoral College is a system of voting that uses popular votes in each individual state to see who wins a state's votes. The person who wins the majority of the votes in one state will win all of the votes for that state. Now, a brief history of our amendments that are related to voting. As you guys know, when we first came up as a country, not everyone had equal rights to vote. People who could vote were generally wealthy, land-owning, white males. So those particular people were the only ones who were allowed to vote, and that became something that a lot of people realized was unfair. So when the 13th Amendment ended slavery, and the 14th gave citizenship to African Americans and the most recently freed slaves, the 15th Amendment granted African Americans the right to vote. So in general, in some states, just being a citizen, like the 14th Amendment offered, did not guarantee suffrage or the right to vote. In some states, they kept trying to deny African Americans the right to vote, either by intimidation, beating people up when they tried to go to the voting booth, or any other option. So after that, the 15th Amendment was added, and that declared in 1870 that the right to vote cannot be denied on the basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. In this case, servitude meaning serving someone else as a slave. One way that people were stopped from voting was something called a literacy test. A literacy test was a test that required a person to prove that they could read or write. Now, while that might seem like a good idea, some states use this as an unfair way to stop African Americans from being able to vote at the time. So the people who would administer the test, kind of like the test proctors, might say that an African American man who got 9 out of 10 correct was denied, while a white man who missed all 10 questions was allowed to vote. So it's something that was really unfair, but it was a practice that was used to stop African Americans from being able to vote. Another thing they did is they came up with an idea called a grandfather clause. And they said, okay, we're not going to deny you the right to vote, but the people who have the right to vote are the ones whose grandfather could vote. So if you think about it, most African Americans at the time would be able to vote since they were citizens, but since their grandfathers were in previous conditions of slavery, they weren't allowed to vote. So this was a way to illegally prevent people from being able to vote. And in 1915, the Supreme Court ruled that the grandfather clause was found to be unconstitutional. A poll tax was another way to make sure that people could only vote if they were wealthy. And what that was is a fee that someone must pay in order to vote. Some states, but not all, made sure that they charged a poll tax, which now is considered an illegal act. Now, the 24th Amendment was a big deal as well. In the 1950s, many Americans demanded that the federal government protect the right for African Americans to vote. Because while it was legal to vote, there were still people who were using violence and other intimidation tactics to prevent African Americans the right to vote. So they protested, gave speeches, and marched in order to bring attention. This was the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, which a lot of you guys already know a lot about from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So in 1964, in the middle of the Civil Rights Movement, the 24th Amendment was added, and it said that the right to vote in national elections shall not be denied because a person fails to pay a poll tax or other tax. So the 24th Amendment is what ended the practice of using a poll tax. The Supreme Court later also said that this rule would apply to state elections as well, voting for things like the governor. Our 19th Amendment, and you guys who are in my class can recognize this poster as one that I have in the back of the room, which became popular during World War II. The 19th Amendment was passed, which gave women the right to vote. In 1918, the House of Representatives voted to approve the women's suffrage. 1919, the Senate approved it. And in 1920, the states ratified, meaning approved, and women got the opportunity to vote and finally become part of the we the people idea that most of our country is thought of throughout our country's history as part of being an American citizen. So our country was founded in 1776, and women didn't get the right to vote until 1920. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 protected the right to vote for all citizens. The law forced the states to obey the Constitution and made clear that the right to vote could not be denied because of a person's color. So this is something that goes back to that Civil Rights Act that we were talking about a moment ago, which outlawed poll taxes, which outlawed intimidation, which outlawed literacy tests and the grandfather clause. So this was kind of a final piece of legislation that stopped that particular practice. Now, when it comes to age, a lot of you guys are already aware that you can vote at 18 years old right now, but until the mid-20th century, the voting age was 21 years old. A lot of people thought there was a lot of problems with that because people in our country had already served in World War II, the Korean War, and some in the Vietnam War, but they were 18, 19, 20 years old, but still didn't have the right to vote. So it was a big issue, and a lot of people protested. And in 1970, Congress passed a law that gave 18-year-olds that right to vote. The Supreme Court said you can't do that. Congress can only set national age requirements, and Congress thought about it and knew that the only way was to amend the Constitution. So Congress tried to pass a law. The Supreme Court used their powers that they get from checks and balances, said that that's not constitutional. You have to go through an entire constitutional amendment. So what they did is in March of 1971, they actually adopted that new amendment and added it to the Constitution. So what are the voting requirements today, besides being 18 years old? Well, the states usually still get to make the decisions regarding voting and how that process is done, whether it's electronic or paper or what. But all citizens are guaranteed the right to vote, and that cannot be denied by any state based on gender or race or anything like that. The states have laws that say only local citizens have the rights to vote. There is a residency requirement, which means you must live in a state for a certain period of time before you can vote in that state. And that's going to depend on each individual state. All states except North Dakota have laws saying you must register before voting. And what that means is you have to add your name to a list that says, I live in this county and I have permission to vote in this particular area. North Dakota, you kind of just show up and vote, and they're cool with that. That's everything. I know we covered a lot, and there was a lot of vocabulary in there as well. So if you need to go back and revisit any of the information, please feel free to go back and do that. Make sure you have all of it written down, because it is all going to be very important for your test that you have coming up later this week, and also important to know as American citizens.